Okay, so welcome everyone to the next installment of the SASGOG Researcher Interview Series, and it is my pleasure to have Dr. Andrea Knittel here with us today as our next interviewee. So I was hoping you could start out by just introducing yourself and saying where you're from originally and what your current titles and roles are at your institution.
Yeah, hi, good morning. Thank you. I'm Andrea Knittel. I'm a general OBGYN at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I am from Michigan. I trained at the University of Michigan and then was a resident at UCSF and have been at UNC now for about 6 years.
Great. And I should also say I'm Marisa Young. I'm an assistant professor of OBGYN at Emory University because I'm new to doing this series as well. Great. And so what are your current responsibilities in terms of clinical and research work that you do at UNC?
Yeah, so I am also an assistant professor. I also have a title as medical director for incarcerated women's health, which really ties into both the clinical and research work that I do. I am a Werher Scholar right now, and so about 78% of my time is dedicated to research and career development. And then in the remaining portion of my time, I provide full scope OB/GYN care to people who are incarcerated in the North Carolina state prison system. And then I am also the fellowship director for our general OB/GYN research fellowship. And so I know the advice pieces later, but for all of you residents out there who are thinking that you want to be generalists and researchers, there are an increasing number of generalist fellowships available that really give you time to sort of hone those skills. And so I'll put in a little plug for ours.
Perfect. Can you just talk a little bit about the Werher program and how that you got involved with that, and for people who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, so the Werher, which is Women's Reproductive Health Research, is a really special NIH program specifically for OBGYNs. And the NIH broadly offers career development awards, which are mentored research awards that are often referred to as a group as K awards. There are individual K awards where you apply as a person and get that award, and it's generally 5 years of a good chunk of protected time for research and career development. And then there are also institutional K awards where the organization applies for that career development award and then selects scholars either by recruiting them to come to the institution to be on that institutional award, or selects folks who are already at the institution. And many institutional K awards, such as those that are offered through CTSA, the Clinical and Translational Science groups, it's either CTSI or CTSA, depending on what institution you're at, those tend to be 2-year awards with a possible 3rd year. But the NIH and the NICHD, which is the Child Health and Development Institute that funds the Werher, really recognize that OBGYNs are in a unique position where 2 years is often not enough time to transition to independent funding. And so the Werher is a 2-year award up to 5 years of support, which is much more like an individual K award in terms of the amount of time that it gives you. And so I know that I have dragged us head on into the NIH alphabet soup, but the Werher is really an amazing program. There are a number of them scattered across the country. They generally have 1 to 2 scholars at a time. And so I feel very, very lucky to be able to have a position on the Werher right now. And so there's definitely some luck in the timing in terms of when those spots open up and are available. But it's a really fantastic program. If folks who are listening are looking for other career development opportunities, the Birch, which is, I'm gonna forget the long name, there's a W in it somewhere, I think it's BIR.
WC, Building Interdisciplinary Research in
Yes,
Health, I think, yeah.
there we go. Yes, we all call it the Birch, but there's a W in there somewhere.
A rogue W.
Yes, exactly. And that is another sort of women's health specific program that supports junior investigators.
That's great. Thank you. And so that's a little bit about kind of how you're supported from a research perspective. What about in terms of topical areas of interest in research for you right now?
Yeah, so both my clinical and research work really centers around the health disparities that are created and exacerbated by involvement in the criminal legal system. And so as I have I practiced in a jail as a resident, and then now in our state prison system, to some extent, the health issues that are present in clinics in the prison are the same as what happens in the community, right? People still get pregnant and have babies, people have dysplasia, they have abnormal bleeding, all the things that we expect to see. But folks who are involved in the carceral system are much less likely to have had great access to healthcare before they were incarcerated. And there's also, because of the way we handle substance use broadly, but particularly substance use in pregnancy in this country, there are a tremendous number of folks with substance use disorders who experience incarceration. So my research right now is, I would say, primarily focused on the management of substance use disorders in pregnancy during incarceration, and really thinking about ways that we can implement the evidence-based strategies we already know, which are, behavioral health treatment and medications for opioid use disorder when that is appropriate. But then also to think about some kind of innovative ways to minimize the harms of incarceration, and get folks out of jails and into residential treatment programs, which are a much better place for their health problems and pregnancy needs to be addressed. I also have some parallel tracks. I'm interested in HIV prevention, also interested in menopause management during incarceration. And so those are also ongoing parts of my work.
Amazing. That's great. I'd love to hear more just about how you got involved in research and how you chose to take this path where really, at least right now, a substantial portion of your time is dedicated to research activities.
Yeah, so I think I may be somewhat unique, although potentially not in this particular company, in that I had a pretty good sense fairly early on that I wanted research to be a substantial part of my career. And so I did a combined MD PhD program. My PhD is in public health, and I really knew from the start that I was interested in social science research, that I was interested in understanding sort of epidemiology and how the intersections of social problems and health really affected people. In terms of how I got involved in carceral medicine and thinking about the criminal legal system, I, as a graduate student, was trying to kind of figure out what my angle was going to be. I was interested in disparities. I was interested in HIV and STI disparities. And I ruled out fairly quickly global health work. I have a tremendous amount of respect for people who do that, and it just wasn't me for a host of reasons. And at some point I read a paper where someone was frankly speculating rather wildly about why HIV disparities might exist in the criminal legal system. And from there, I just really couldn't let it go. And so my dissertation focused on that. And then when I started my clinical rotations, I had a strong suspicion that I would enjoy practicing with that group of folks. And that has certainly been borne out. My patients are the most charming and delightful people you could hope to care for.
That's great. So there can be challenges in integrating a career in research with being an academic specialist in general OBGYN. Can you talk a little bit about any kind of challenges you faced along the way, or roadblocks or advice that you have for other people trying to navigate a similar career path?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately there are barriers sort of at every point that have to be navigated in one way or another. I think the first one really is training. And, so I chose to pursue a PhD, but I certainly have colleagues who are successful specialist researchers without a PhD. But I think the majority chose to spend some amount of time really focused on gaining some additional research skills. And that can happen, I think an MPH during, med school or residency is maybe enough. It's often not quite there in terms of needing a little bit more time to really hone those skills and develop an early research program. But I think that the number of fellowships that are offered for folks coming out of residency are a really great opportunity to, continue to practice clinical medicine, but also to have some protected time to really build those skills. I was a fellow in the program that I now direct for a year, and I think it really provided me the protected space that I needed to really, after residency, even those residency programs that are very supportive of research and where people are very productive, at best, I think one's research program sort of limps along during residency as you complete your clinical training. And so that time for me was really critical to get things started, to pick up things that I had not yet finished from many years before, and get those things really going again. And then certainly, academic medicine is no longer do you take an academic job and you see patients 2 days a week and you have a day of teaching and then some time, to be sort of the gentleman scientist. I think that is, long gone, and figuring out how to protect that time is really challenging. And so the other thing that I think a fellowship can be useful for is making a plan for a K award or some other career development award. The Doris Duke Foundation, which also funds me, and the AGOS, which the American, I'm going to say the name wrong, but there is a foundation associated with ABOG and ACOG that also has a career development award. There are a number of different foundations that offer similar awards. And I think while certainly at the beginning of my research career, I thought that I didn't need a K award because I had a PhD already, and I didn't need more training. Darn it, I had been in training for so long and I didn't want that. And then I think it became very clear as I joined the faculty that only a very small portion of a training grant is the benefit of the training that you get, and most of it is the time to write other grants and figure out how to protect that time. So I think the funding challenges cannot be understated, and that is really across the board in OBGYN. And then I think specialists also run into this question of scope. And, once you get that K award and are 75% clinical, do you either take what the NIH does allow and go down to 50% on that award because you define yourself as a surgeon and need more clinical time, with the trade-off obviously being that that's, a third of the protected time that you were planning to have? Or do you figure out how to adjust your scope? Or in many ways, I think a lot of us feel like we're pushed to kind of curtail our scope. For me, I feel really, I think both really lucky and also just happy that the things that I enjoyed doing, I felt fit within the scope of what I did. So I continue to take labor and delivery call, but I am only on labor and delivery on nights and weekends. And so that isn't part of my broader clinical time. I still do GYN surgery, although I decided I knew that I didn't like laparoscopic hysterectomies when I finished residency. And so it was not a huge leap to stick to vaginal surgery. So I do vaginal hysterectomies. I do the occasional open hysterectomy. You know, we all try to avoid that for our patients, but when it's necessary, it's necessary. And then I do minor, you know, all the full scope of minor surgeries. And for me, that scope has worked really well, but I think some folks decide, you know, to be hospitalists. Some folks, you know, there are lots of different ways that you can kind of draw some lines around clinical work. I think the important thing for me, and the advice I would certainly give to others, is to figure out how to make sure that in particular clinic time is circumscribed, and you know, that you are not spending half of your protected time answering my chart messages and following up on labs. And, you know, clinical time can definitely expand into any available moment. And so I think the next challenge, you know, after you've got that protected time, you've figured out your scope, then is how to make sure that you are, you know, that you're maintaining your skills and practicing the full scope that you've set out for yourself, but then also making sure that you're really pretty rigid about keeping that protected time so that you can do the research that you know, fought so long and hard to work into your career.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and much of that resonates with me as well. So I think that that's helpful to hear, you know, for people, you know, who are maybe coming through residency now or in their first years out. And then just finally to wrap up, you've given I really appreciate your perspective and lots of great advice kind of sprinkled in, but is there any other sort of pearls you have or advice for people who are academic specialists in general OBGYN who want to pursue a research career specifically?
Yeah, I think probably the most important thing is to just not let anyone tell you that you can't do it, because, you know, it may be the case that whatever you have in your mind is not going to be what your career ends up looking like to the letter. But if what you want is a research career, you can do it. You can figure out how to do it. And in order to do it, you're going to need a bunch of mentors. So I tell people to approach mentorship the same way they approach friends. If they had only one friend in their lives, you know, it would be sort of a sad social scene. And similarly, I think with one mentor, no one person can provide you with all of the career advice, research mentorship, you know, and just personal navigating all the things that we are doing, particularly early in our careers. And so reach out to folks. SASGOG is a great resource for mentorship. I have a mentor who I was paired with a couple of years ago at a conference. Actually, I know which conference because it was 2020 and we didn't meet in person for years, but, you know, have that mentorship that has been really incredibly helpful. And I think those mentors often can become sponsors who then put you up for various things, and can support you in ways beyond just advising and sort of career coaching. But yeah, don't underestimate the value of mentors, and have no fear about just cold emailing folks whose work you admire and get connected with them, because it's flattering when people send you an email that says that they liked your work. And so that has been probably the primary way that I have found mentors, is just reaching out to folks who I thought had something to teach me.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I know that you're very busy. We really appreciate it. I think this was lovely and very helpful. And so thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thanks.